Hello, Middle Earth hobbyist and LTR SBG team fans. We're here with the next episode of Battle Class Season 1 How a Game Plays Out. Today we will be going over the movement phase. And joining me is going to be, of course, our instructors, who's going to be Joe, Sam, Jason, Rainier, Derek, and myself. So we will be going over the movement phase and talking over um, what a good movement phase can do for you and the importance of movement. And also, we will be introducing some different lingo that we like to use, or I personally like to use when I'm describing movement. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in the movement phase. Movement is probably the most important turn of the game, in my opinion. Um, it really it's all about positioning your army to make different plays and to really to move towards the end goal, which is to um, complete your objectives of the scenario. So here's what happens in the movement phase: charging your opponent, um, combats, like not combats, but like basing your opponents, um, magic, and different heroics. So one thing to keep in mind when you're moving is to look over what your opponent is doing. Sometimes it benefits you to actually move second, especially when you're zoning your opponent. Here's what I mean by zoning. So sometimes the way your army is positioned and the way your opponent's army is positioned, if you move forward too much, you can allow your opponent to then counter charge you and get you in combat. So generally, when I like to move, I like to do something called zoning my opponent, which is move in a way where I cannot get counter charged, but I'm at least one turn away from, or really 2 turns away from getting in combat, or one turn away from getting in combat with my heroes. Thoughts?
Yeah, so actually, in my opinion, movement is the most important um, turn in the game. And I'm saying this as a Rohan player, someone who plays a light skirmish army, a very low model kind of army, where it relies on mobility and very efficient movement to do what you want to do. Um, so, like for instance, you're talking about zoning. When I play my Rohan, Rivendell Knights, other armies, cons, armies similar to Rohan, I think would use the same tactic, and not this rule doesn't just apply to Rohan; it could apply to anyone. But I'm using this as an example because you have to be very efficient. Is you want to be able to move your army where you can still shoot. So that's what I'm saying. It's the most important turn of the game because if you're gonna move your army, you're gonna want to you're gonna want to think. Okay, so I'm moving half my movement to shoot, less than half my movement to be able to shoot my opponent. I got to move them over here where I can be a turn away from the objective. But I want to make sure my opponent is not 2 turns away from charging me. And what I mean by this is I always like to do, my rule of thumb is I like to be 8 inches away from my opponent with my Rohirrim. Now, I say 8 inches because then that then I can charge them the next turn if I get priority if I want, but they won't be able to charge me. And if I decide to stay and shoot, they move towards me. Then the next turn it would go down to heroic, and they'd be able to charge me anyway. But I try not to stand and shoot. I try and keep moving and getting in a position where I can charge and do my combat. Movement also is very key because it allows you to use magic. Um, with your casters, various casters of the game, and that can set up pretty big plays later in the turn, later in the round. Um, so yeah, I think that movement is very key. I think, especially as a Rohan player, you literally set yourself up for everything you want to do in that turn. You set yourself up for the combats you want. You set yourself up for the shots you want. You set yourself up for the magic you want to cast. You set yourself up on an objective. It's very key, and I would argue it's probably the most important because basically the shooting and the fight phase are things that you set up in the movement phase. Thoughts?
I definitely got to agree with you on the results of the combat and shooting is the result of how you move in the movement phase. Before you actually get in combat, when you're on separate sides of the field, moving second, obviously it is ideal because you get to react to how your opponent moves. Versus when you do finally get to that close combat stage, then that's when you want to try and move first if all possible. There's a balance between reacting and preparing. I know a lot of times when I do finally get in close combat for my dwarves, say I want to protect my hero, I got him in combat, and I want to make sure he doesn't get charged and peeled off into another combat that I don't want him to be in. So maybe I'll need to take some models and, kind of bubble him. Well, those models aren't really doing anything. They're just standing there protecting him. They're not in combat. And so that's kind of a waste factor of preparing versus reacting, where if my opponent's already moved and I have those models, I can charge them in somewhere. I don't have to worry about them moving in on me. Another thing I like to use is terrain. I like to use terrain as an extension of my army. I'll set one side of my army up against terrain and kind of make an even longer shield wall and make sure I can't be hit from the side and have more models taken out. I think it's really important to know your army. A lot of mistakes I see from beginning players is they'll send just any model into combat or somewhere else. They may take an archer. They may have, maybe they have archers on the front line. You want to make sure you have heavy defense on the front line. I know this is like really basic, but I've seen it happen often. And you just want to understand what each model can do. There's times where you want to use your guys as effective as possible. I'd say that's maybe 70 or 80% of the game, and the other percent of the game where it's down to the last little bit and it's tooth and nail. Then you can send all your guys into combat. That's a recommendation that somebody made to me many years ago, and it's good to have some archers at the back to shoot, but eventually maybe a hero dies and you need to start making courage checks or something, and I've had archers flee quite a few times. But it's good to keep them. I'd say it's good to keep them together. Keep the squishy ones kind of out of combat if you can, and send your heavy duty combat guys into combat like what they're made to do. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just going to sound like a parrot here, but I have to agree with all three of these. Movement is definitely the most important. I know last episode I said deployment is the most important, but deployment is the most important for setup. Movement is the most important during the game. So, like all three of these guys, I think have gone over so far. You have to set yourself up. I'm kind of conservative, like Sam is. I like to deploy back, as I've said, and I like to move second. So before we get into combats, I really kind of hope I roll low for priority, because I like to react to what my opponent's doing. If my opponent's just going to sit back for a turn and he's got an archer heavy army, I know I need to start moving towards him, and that's where you can use things like heroic marches, which we talked about in deployment. For allies, you need to set yourself up with movement to get allies for, say, a heroic march to kind of counteract and get your opponent's face quickly if they have an archery heavy army. Another thing you do is Joe likes his skirmish tactics with his Rohan, and you can do what we call kiting, move and shoot. So if he's fighting, he's all cavalry. So if he's fighting against an infantry heavy army, then he's going to do a lot of kiting, which is moving and shooting. Troops can move 6, but his cavalry can move 10. So he can move. If it's a scenario where you're going for kills, just make him chase you the whole game by running 10 inches away, and then making him move 6 to get within 4. Well, then he can shoot you for a turn or so, and then move back and move half distance, and you can do that. The big thing for moving with like a shield wall in cavalry, though, which is something Dan and I know about, we got to have the ability to get our cavalry models around our shield wall. We don't want to get caught in a tactic where, like Sam's doing, where he's using the terrain to cover his flank, and then our cavalry is essentially, your cavalry's your hitters. You're getting in your charge bonuses, you're getting your lance bonuses if you have them, strength bonuses for Rohan now. You got to be able to set yourself up so that you can get those bonuses. Sam said it, you need to know your army. So when you move somebody, like I run fiefdoms a lot. Imrahil has a 12-inch banner, so I need to make sure that Imrahil's not sitting on the far right side of my flank. Yeah, 12 inches is great, but if the battle line extends, for half the board, then I'm not getting a large chunk of my army with that banner reroll, which is important. And even more so, he's got, the fiefdoms warriors have a +1 to their fight value within 3 inches of him. So again, if he's off sitting on the side, I'm not getting a bonus to my guy. So you really got to know your army. Joe said it best. You're moving to set up the rest of that turn. You're moving to set up your shooting. You're moving to set up your combats. And then Sam said it. You're moving to set up and protect your heroes. Yeah, if you want your hero on that flank maybe, so that he can come in there, especially if he's on a monster or something with like a Felby, to do a hurl. But then you got to watch out for a counter charge, and that's where you kind of have to bubble wrap him by sending some guys, using the zoning, using that 1-inch control zone to keep guys from being able to get into your heroes. So yeah, like it's a chess game. It really is. You're positioning and moving yourself to set up the rest of the turn. Yeah, guys, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have quite a few thoughts actually on a lot of what's been said. So, I'd like to elaborate on some stuff that both of you guys said. One of the things is reaction. Like Sam says something about reacting to your opponent's movement. So that's important with if somebody charges you. Like say that you have the second turn to move. So somebody charges you, then you have the opportunity to react to your opponent and envelop, which means to wrap around and encircle your opponent's army, which is something I think all of us like to do. Sam and I always have the models for it, but if he did, I'm sure he would. To pretty much use your movement to take your army and encircle your opponent. And that's really important, is to react towards your opponent's movement. And it doesn't only have to be when you get close. Some of it could be like a magic caster. I versed last year at Nova. I versed a guy who was playing Saruman, and we were playing on a Lake Town board. And pretty much, I would use my movement to react on Saruman and just move my army around the next building so he couldn't cast any Sorcerer's Blast on me or anything. Another thing that I think is important is something I like to call movement lanes. So with Jason and I, we both play Shield Wall armies, and Sam even. And especially with Jason and I, we both have very long shield walls, a lot of models, and it's not easy to navigate your heroes and cavalry around such long lines. You want to be able to really maximize that 10-inch movement when you're moving them. So one thing I like to do to kind of mitigate that is I like to, when we're moving, not necessarily when we get into combat, but when we're moving towards combat, like maybe one or two, at least one turn away from combat, you can measure it. I like to separate my shield wall into sections and leave cavalry-size holes in my shield wall, so I can charge my heroes through there into my opponent's line, and then move my shield wall around the hero. You might not be able to get your foot troops in combat. But what you're doing is you're encircling your hero so then they cannot get countercharged by your opponent. And then you have your all your heroes in combat. It also can work with cavalry. That's another thing I like to do with my cavalry. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of when I look at my movement, there's also another main army I play is hobbits, and hobbits have really slow movement. Like compared to Rohan, they move not at all really. Um, so you want to make sure you're utilizing your slow movement, getting to the objectives, doing whatever you need to do. But then there's another thing with an army like hobbits or goblin town, whatever, is you want to make sure when you're moving, you're fully aware of your opponent's monsters, for instance, where a single hurl can devastate your lines. So it could devastate a Rohan line, it could devastate a Gondor line as well. But the slower moving armies, and they won't have the mobility to reach around shield walls and things. So it's about moving and setting yourself up a few turns in advance. I think that's with Rohan and hobbits. When I move, I want to be 2 turns in advance of what I'm planning on doing. So that means if I'm going to, let's say I want to charge a Mordor shield wall with a troll and the Witch King, I want to know exactly 2 turns. Okay, so I'm going to charge in, but I'm going to have these troops and these heroes off to the side to do this the next turn. So that's kind of how I like to play and move, really, with both those armies. Other armies that I play, like Dol Amroth and other Shield Wall armies, I'm not as used to. Dan and Jason and Sam give you probably better insight on that, but Hobbits, Rohan, kind of skirmish armies that don't rely on a shield wall. I like to utilize the Envelop, which with Hobbits can be difficult, but you have to set yourself up for it. And with Rohan, you could also envelop, but you need to set yourself up for it. That way, the next turn, if you get countercharged, you have a few troops or whatever out in the field that can charge in and do their thing. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to mention something we actually haven't touched yet. Exploiting your opponent's might is a thing I believe all of us do, and that's feed heroes, where we take just one soul model and throw them up against a hero. It's basically a dead man walking, but that hero is either going to have to just take this one turn where it's usually a fairly expensive model, and they're just going to kill one model that one turn, or they're going to have to use one of their might to call it maybe heroic combat to try and make up their points. And that's something that's really useful. Another thing, you want to do the opposite with your heroes. You want to try and get your close combat heroes and other guys in on maybe. I like to do this a lot, to get a bunch of guys on one model with a hero and call it heroic combat. That way I get to maximize my killing efforts and just move across the field more and sweep. Any thoughts?
Yeah, dead man walking. You said that, Sam. I just thought it's actually I did it recently. Dan can attest to this against Aragorn, and Aragorn gets his free point of might, but if I can do it on a turn where he's called a heroic and he's already purchased free point, then I have to make him use it from the store. So it's a very tactically smart and sound move to do, is to try and tie your heroes up. And like I said earlier, I don't like to have priority and move first when we're not in combat. But once you get in combat, you want to move first. That way you have the ability to pick and choose. And what Joe was saying about leaving troops in the rear, with shield walls, you can do the same thing, especially with Minas Tirith. You've got those little triangles running around with 2 or 3 guys, or three or more guys getting that +1 defense. Well, once you get into combat and you start sweeping around the flanks with those guys, you're sending them against one or two. Maybe you're sending them against 2 guys or more, but you can shield with them to double your dice in that and hopefully keep them alive. But you're trying to set it up so you can defend your flanks and keep yourself from getting countercharge and counter surrounded. And then at the same time, using your heroes and your troops where you can throw dice in a situation where, like I said, I've been doing a Gondor Fightims combo. So I have a Warrior Ministerial at the front line with 2 men-at-arms and pikes. And then you have to set yourself up also with pikes and shields and smart for movement. So instead of just keeping a straight line with my pikes where I'd be blocking myself in, where if I lose, I'm trapped, I can stagger my pikes in an L-shaped formation in order to be able to back away the middle one so that I don't get trapped. But if you do it that way, then you throw more dice in there. Because effectively, if I have 4 dice, 3 for my men and then 1 with a banner, and then that gives you a better chance of not only winning but then hopefully killing. So when you're fighting a lot of other shields, something we have common here, especially since Dan and Joe and Sam and I all play fairly, often. It's usually a shield wall, kick each other in the shins type. But yeah, I really like that dead man walking, Sam. But that again goes back to tactically moving and knowing your army. So you got to be willing to sacrifice a cheaper piece in order to let your heroes do the work. And what you were saying, slingshotting, sending a hero against a weaker model with other, bigger hitting troops of your own. So I'll send an Immerhill with some Nitrodor and Roth against a single infantryman. Well, hopefully they should be able to win that, and then slingshot them into some other pieces to hopefully collapse a flank or outnumber an opponent's minor or even bigger hero in order to help myself out in the long game. So again, it's just a chess match. But yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I got a couple. Yeah, I agree. I think that I think that a couple things you guys kind of touched on that I would like to elaborate on is trapping. So in the movement phase, especially if you go first, you can actually trap yourself and actually trap your heroes. Something to look out for. For instance, you cannot back more than 1 model up to make way for a fight. So make sure that when you're moving your guys, you don't accidentally trap yourself. And that happens actually quite frequently, even to me still. I trap myself in a position and I can't get out of it. So it's just take your time in the movement, make sure that you get your spear support, stack your dice. And what we mean by stacking dice is maximize the number of dice you have compared to your opponent. So that means getting the cavalry charges. That means getting your spear supports in. That means getting your heroes in. That means getting your banner in. And just kind of the symphony of your army, pretty much you want to really maximize it in the movement. Another thing that I would like to touch up upon is magic. Magic is another really key thing that happens in the movement phase. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because I like to have a different video for magic. But with magic, I will say one thing is you can actually really mess up your opponent's movement with magic, such with spells like command, with spells like sorcerer's blast, where you can disrupt your opponent's movement, and shield wall, which can really hinder their movement. I think a lot of new players. As a matter of fact, we just kind of watched the game yesterday with a newer player. They didn't really maximize their magic, which is something that you can always look into doing in the movement phase. Thoughts?
So yeah, to go off of magic, not only to think more defensively about magic, if you don't have it and your opponent does, you actually have to intelligently so that you can defend your own guys. One of the things that still happens to me, and it always irks me when it happens, is getting one of my own guys sorcerer's blasted into my hero. I mean, you're paying Immerhill, for example, you're paying 15 points for that horse and 5 points for that lance, and you just got a guy sorcerer's blasted into you. So there goes 20 points on top of all the hitting ability. So when we're talking about doubling, you're maximizing your dice. I charged Immerhill on foot as opposed to charging with Immerhill on mounted. I've already lost 1 dice. Then you go to saying, all right, well now I've won, but I've lost 5 dice because I don't get the knockdown bonuses. And this is strictly against infantry, but even if you're going against cavalry, you would get the lance bonus of +1 to wound. So magic, you also have to think if you're not a magic player and your opponent has it, you have to move strategically with your heroes and your army as well against magic, because you don't want to give them a shield wall and let a magic caster get on a flank and then just sorcerer's blast straight down your flank or whatever. It would be really bad. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, as someone with a shield wall, I definitely got to say, if your opponent has a monster who can throw or magic that can cast Sorcerer's Blast, you really want to change up your shield wall just a little bit, spread some guys out a little bit. I know having the ballista as well, I've seen opponents actually spread out their guys more, so I can't get uh, the spread on the hit for my ballista. And yeah, I've had my heroes taken off their horses and goats a couple times in the past, and it's not good. You want to, I'd say you want to maintain a shield wall, a closeness with your army, but you want to spread your guys out just a little bit. Maybe take the front rank and maybe an inch forward, and maybe kind of stagger the line a little bit, so that if they do happen to throw, they're not going to hit as many guys. And then if you do get the charge off, your guys aren't too far away, and they can still pile on the monster or even the caster. Thoughts?
Yeah, this is kind of my last point for movement. A lot of it's been covered, but I'm gonna give like a little short example. Last Nova Open, I took Magic. First tournament I've ever taken Magic to a tournament. And I'm going to give two separate examples, two different games I had. The first one, I had Saruman, the good Saruman on a horse with my Rohan. I charged Saruman. He already had moved. We had engaged. I moved Saruman, and Sorcerer's blasted his Warriors of Minas Tirith with spears. I did this to take away his bone ability to support the guys that I had charged, and I rolled a 6 for the distance. So I just took away 6 spearmen, and that's not including I actually killed like 2 or 3 of them. So if you're using magic, look at what you can do to disrupt your opponent. And it happens in the movement, and it's a big part of the movement. That's kind of why I'm telling this. And then the other one was I was versing 2 Iron Hills ballistas with all goats versus my Rohan. I used command with Saruman and commanded the goat towards my guys. And anything that's within 6 inches of that guy cannot be shot at by his ballistas. And that was almost my entire army. So if you have magic, it actually can be a really good tool for you in the movement phase to disrupt your opponent's movement. And those are just 2 little small examples. And that pretty much covers it for me for movement. Thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to add on to that. You brought up a good point. So, one thing that a lot of stuff happens in the movement phase, and unfortunately, I don't think we're gonna be able to cover everything because of just how many nuances there are to movement. But I would like to bring up 2 points to actually what Joe said. So, how do you, if you're versing magic, how do you counter that in the movement phase? That's really when you counter it. That's when you set up the counter for it. So one thing to do is use your zoning techniques that we talked about. Zone your opponent. Maybe try to move some cavalry around to threaten the caster. A lot of people like to take their caster and hide them behind a wall, a shield wall, or hide them behind some terrain. Threaten the caster with cavalry, with heroes. Make them focus their efforts on the threat rather than your army. I hate to use this example, but when a weasel's trapped, it always tries to fight out of it. And that's what you have to do. You have to try to trap the caster and make them focus their efforts on the threat rather than your army. And another thing that I would like to, I think that another example I have that is a little bit more broader, but it's kind of touches on the same thing, is I do something called pushing the pace of the game. This happens in the movement phase. Use your might and your heroes to fast forward the pace of the game. So what do I mean by pace? I mean the pretty much the timing of everything, the speed of the game, where I would move 10 inches with my cavalry. You can do heroic marches and move 15, and you just kind of speed up the process. Really put the pressure on your opponent. Use the heroics in the move phase to drain your opponent's might out of them, and there are several heroes who can do that in the game. But that's something that I think that is really important in the movement phase. Not a lot of people talk about is pushing the pace of the game, using your might to draw might out of your opponent, and then threatening not only just casters but threatening other heroes as well. Thoughts?
Yeah, another factor. It came to mind when you were talking just a moment ago, Dan. Is intimidation. Having a few models, maybe block an alleyway or something. Maybe you're trying to protect an objective. It's always good to have bodyguards, more or less. I actually had a game at RGS3 where I had to protect my encampment, and my opponent had a warg, and he's got more movement than my dwarves and their stubby little legs. So I kind of had to take my control zones and just kind of create a barrier on this one, like, really clear path he would have had I not blocked it. And sometimes, it's not the greatest, most efficient tactic to use, but for the sake of winning the game, sometimes you gotta have the intimidation factor. The intimidation factor also goes well with your army as a whole. If you have your whole army together, and it's moving forward. I've seen opponents actually kind of break under the fact that there's all that coming towards them at once, and it kind of the intimidation just kind of messed up their plan, and it didn't really go well for them. But it's a good tactic to use in intimidation. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think this would probably be my last point. So we talked a lot, but one thing we touched on this briefly at the beginning, but moving for shooting. So there's several scenarios where you actually have to start, 24 inches away at the minimum, at the minimum, maybe more. Example is to the death for that scenario. When you're moving, even if you're not an archery heavy army, I mean, my army's not overly heavy with archers. I've got 8 or 9 shots in my army, depending on model counts and however many points we're playing. But those are things where if you're moving, you don't want to, for lack of a better phrase, shoot yourself in the foot and block your archer's line of sight. That way, you can steal a cheeky victory point. A perfect example for me is I played Season of Prize at a Nashville event last year that I came really close to placing in. And first turn of the game, my opponent did a heroic march with Elisar. He was playing Warriors of the Dead with Elisar, or I guess it's Aragorn at that point. But he marched up and he left Aragorn. This is an example of bad movement for him. He left Aragorn in a position where I had great shots with my archers. So I was playing full fiefdom, and I had Dune here. We were at 1,000 points. Dune here with about 13 Blackroot Vale archers. And if you don't know what they can do, if Blackroot Vale archers don't move and they're within 6 inches of Dune here, they get to re-roll ones to hit. And if they partake in a heroic shoot, then they also get to re-roll failed wounds. So I had 12 of them around Dune here, and I moved 3 of them to get perfect shots. So I had 13 shots, and I called a heroic shoot, and I maneuvered my army around so I had those shots, and I ended up doing 3 wounds against Aragorn, which he faded out of 2 of them, but took the 3rd. So I stole a victory point right there for that game, just based off of the fact that I moved in a way to allow myself to shoot, and he moved in a way that set himself up to be shot, and it was not good for him. So when you're moving, you especially for long distance games like Seize the Prize or To the Death, you have to set yourself up because you don't want, again, like I said, you don't want your LSR, or you don't want your Immerhill, Boromir, whoever, Thranduil shot off of their mount because you're paying for that and that's hitting power. But on the flip side, you want to be able to use the intimidation, like Sam said, of being, hey, you're going to put that guy right there because I've got these bow shots. So it's all a chess match. Again, it all comes back to a chess match. What are you going to do based off of what I'm doing, what I could possibly throw at you? But yeah, that's my last point, guys. Appreciate it. Thoughts?
I have a couple thoughts on what you guys talked about. Very valid points. First off, I know we talked about movement lanes, but there's also something called firing lanes, and we'll touch upon this on the shooting. But you really need to set up your firing lanes in the movement. So a lot of times, not everybody's done this. You accidentally move your troops in front of your archers. So good can't even shoot their archers that turn, and evil has to take in the ways for their shots. So make sure when you're moving to keep in mind where you want to shoot first off, and keep in mind where terrain is and stuff when you move your archers, because sometimes you can move your archers behind a wall, and then you'll have to take like a in the way check or something. So you just need to be careful when you're moving, especially your archers or somebody that needs line of sight like magic. That you move them in a way that is able to shoot or cast. Another thing that Sam had that I want to bring up, there's something I like to call it's something that I've become kind of good at doing. Is there's a point in the game where the lines have met and everyone's fighting and heroes are fighting and stuff, and I like to call that that little section of the battle. I like to call that the pocket. It's kind of like a boxing term. But one thing to keep in mind in moving is when you're in the pocket with somebody is to use your might to ensure that you don't get trapped and stuff, and to use your control zones. This is what Sam kind of brushed up upon. Is use your control zones and other models to protect your heroes. So you can set models up so that their heroes cannot charge your heroes, or that people cannot other troops cannot charge your heroes because you've used control zones and you used other models to block that from happening. Furthermore, make sure that you keep in mind that you have troops around who can peel off troops. Not troops, can peel off heroes. So, like, say that you charge my hero with somebody, and then you take two guys and trap him, and you charge him with two more guys. Well, if I have a spare guy, I can charge your hero and peel him off the fight. So either you have to call a heroic combat and then charge back into my hero, or if you're out of might, then you just forfeit the fight with the hero. So I like to call that little section of the battle the pocket, and you can use control zones and other models to really screw over your opponent's movement. And that's actually one benefit of moving first. Thoughts? Alright, guys, well, I guess we'll call it a wrap there. Derek and Rainier will be at the end. So stay tuned for them. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment below. And enjoy your Middle-earth hobby. And we will be back with the next episode, which will be shooting. Stay tuned for Derek and Rainier. And take care.
Hey guys, this is Rainier. Tuning in for today's episode on movement. I don't have much to say today because it's going to probably just be paraphrasing what previous people have talked about. But I do have some points and I guess advice and tips that I'd want to give to both new players or like middle of the road players that want to get better with moving. My biggest thing to say would be positioning is one of the best things in the movement phase that you could do. What I always try to do is I always try to position myself not just to be in a good situation for that move phase, but to be in a good situation for the next 1 or 2 movement phases. So an example would be to not just charge all your cavalry into combat, but to charge half of them into combat and leave half of them in reserve for the next turn in case you're either swamped by your opponent or you lose priority. So that's a little thing that I'd have to say about that. Just position yourself to be in a prime position to win. Never charge your cavalry by themselves. I'd also say there's a big misconception that cavalry is used like a big beautiful charge across the field, just trampling stuff. That can happen, but for most of the cases, cavalry is used as a reactionary force or as a scouting party. So don't do the mistake of charging your cavalry, charge in, getting one good move, and then being swamped the next turn and destroyed. That's a big mistake that a lot of people make. Another tip that I'd probably have to say about movement is know the pace of the game. Know the scenario you're playing. Like I said earlier, think 1 or 2 turns ahead of time. So if you're playing a scenario where there's an objective on the other part of the board, don't be shy about heroic moving or heroic marching or getting your guys over there really fast, because sometimes it's better to spend might to position yourself in a good position than to save your might and be kind of positioned to lose the fight. It's very much like you're in a battle with somebody and there's a big hill in the middle. Better to exert your energy into getting on top of that hill than to save it and be fighting a uphill battle, if that kind of makes sense. But again, like I said when I first started talking, I don't know what else I can add, because a lot of people have talked about really, really smart things with moving and heroics and whatnot. So yeah, I guess that's all I have to say today. I'll see you guys next time.